His eyes held truths that shattered her empire. Standing before Victoria, the disheveled trespasser revealed the impossible. "I'm not who you think." Her father's greatest secret stood breathing before her. Half-brother, full stranger, blood of her blood. While luxury mocked her from every wall, all she believed crumbled beneath the weight of his existence. Some truths cut deeper than knives. Victoria Renaud's heels clicked against Italian marble with the precision of a metronome, each step amplifying through the cavernous lobby of Renaud Enterprises. The sound announced her presence like a royal decree, causing employees to straighten imperceptibly as she passed. Today was like any other day, meetings scheduled with military precision, decisions worth millions hanging on her every word, and the weight of her father's legacy pressing down on her shoulders with familiar heaviness. Her crisp white suit caught the morning light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows, creating an almost ethereal glow around her slender frame that only enhanced the aura of untouchability that she had carefully cultivated over years of being the youngest female CEO in Barcelona's competitive business landscape. Security had called her directly, something they never did unless the situation was exceptional. "Ms. Renaud, we've apprehended a trespasser attempting to access the executive floor," the head of security had explained, his voice betraying unusual hesitation. "He's making statements about your family that suggest we should involve you personally." Something in his tone had caused a ripple of unease to travel down her spine, an unfamiliar sensation for someone who prided herself on emotional control. Victoria had contemplated sending her chief of staff to handle the matter, but something, intuition perhaps, had compelled her to address it personally, a decision that would irrevocably alter the carefully constructed narrative of her life. The security office was utilitarian, a stark contrast to the opulence that characterized the rest of the building. Two guards stood at attention as she entered, their expressions carefully neutral as they gestured toward the man seated in the corner. Victoria's first impression was unremarkable. Another unfortunate soul from Barcelona's growing homeless population who had perhaps sought shelter in the wrong building. His clothes were weathered but not filthy, suggesting someone trying to maintain dignity despite circumstances. His beard was unkempt, yet not wild, framing a face that seemed to hold both exhaustion and defiance in equal measure. What struck her most powerfully, however, were his eyes, deep-set, intelligent, and unsettlingly familiar in a way she couldn't immediately place. "You've caused quite a disruption today," Victoria stated coolly, maintaining the professional distance that had served her so well in boardrooms across Europe. She remained standing, a subtle power play that established her authority without needing to declare it. "My security team says you've been making claims about my family. I'm curious what would drive someone to trespass on private property with such an unusual approach." She studied him with the analytical gaze that had dissected countless business proposals and competitors, searching for tells of deception or mental instability, yet finding neither in the steady way he met her gaze without flinching or looking away, as most did when confronted with her intensity. Sebastian didn't rise from his chair, an act of subtle defiance that immediately set him apart from others who encountered Victoria Renaud. "I've tried conventional channels for 3 months, he replied, his voice carrying the unexpected refinement of education beneath the slight roughness of someone who hadn't engaged in regular conversation recently. Emails unanswered, requests for meetings denied, even a letter sent to your private residence returned unopened." He reached slowly into his jacket pocket, causing the guards to tense, but retrieved only a worn photograph which he placed carefully on the table between them. "My mother gave me this before she died last year. She told me it was time I knew who my father was." The photograph slid across the polished surface, coming to rest directly before Victoria. The image was faded with time, but unmistakable. Her father, Alejandro Renault, 25 years younger, with his arm around a beautiful woman Victoria had never seen before. They were laughing, intimate, clearly more than acquaintances. The timestamp placed it during the same period her mother had been suffering through the difficult pregnancy that would ultimately claim her life shortly after Victoria's birth. But it wasn't the evidence of her father's infidelity that caused Victoria's carefully composed expression to falter. It was the unmistakable similarity between the man seated before her and the father whose portrait hung prominently in her office upstairs, a resemblance that no amount of hardship or circumstance could fully disguise, one that she should have recognized immediately upon seeing those eyes that were so eerily similar to the ones she faced in the mirror every morning. The security office seemed to compress around Victoria as oxygen became suddenly scarce, the familiar sensation of control slipping through her fingers like fine sand. Sebastian watched her recognition dawn with an expression that held neither triumph nor accusation, merely the patient resignation of someone who had carried a heavy truth for too long. "My mother was Maria Alvarez," he continued, his voice softening almost imperceptibly as he spoke her name. "She was an architectural consultant on your father's first major development in the city centre. Their relationship lasted nearly 2 years, ending only when he learned she was pregnant. The facts were delivered without emotional inflection, as though he were presenting a business case rather than unraveling the carefully constructed mythology of the Renault family legacy that had been Victoria's North Star since childhood. Victoria's mind raced through calculations, dates, timelines, and implications cascading through her thoughts with dizzying speed. She was 34. This man appeared to be approximately 40, placing his birth during the period when her father was still building the empire she now commanded. The period before her birth, before her mother's death, had transformed Alejandro Renault from ambitious businessman to driven widower, who channeled all his energy into building a legacy for his only daughter. "You claim to be my half-brother," she stated, her voice maintaining its professional steadiness despite the seismic shift occurring beneath the foundation of her identity. "Why come forward now, after all these years?" The question was pointed, suspicious, the same tone she used when sensing weaknesses in business negotiations. Sebastian's weathered hands rested on the table, palms upward in a gesture that suggested openness rather than threat. "My mother never told me who my father was while she was alive. She made me promise to open a particular letter only after her passing. She protected me from the truth. Perhaps protecting him as well." A flicker of emotion crossed his features, quickly mastered. "I had a good life, Victoria. Maria was an excellent mother who ensured I received an education despite our limited means. I had my own architectural firm for 15 years in Madrid before the economic crisis wiped everything out." His eyes met hers with unflinching directness. "I'm not here for a handout or to scandalize the Renault name. I simply thought, after losing everything, that perhaps knowing my family might offer something money can't provide." Victoria circled the table slowly, her designer heels suddenly feeling precarious beneath her. With deliberate control, she took the seat opposite Sebastian, a concession to the gravity of the moment that did not go unnoticed by either the security personnel or the man claiming to be her brother. Up close, the resemblance was even more pronounced. The same high cheekbones that photographers had captured in countless business profiles, the particular arch of eyebrows that their father had always claimed came from generations of Renault men. "Our father passed away 7 years ago," she said, the collective pronouns slipping out before she could catch herself. "He never mentioned. He never gave any indication." The words faltered as she confronted the possibility that Alejandro Renault, the man whose business principles formed the cornerstone of her identity, had deliberately hidden a firstborn son. Sebastian nodded, a gesture that somehow conveyed both understanding and resignation. I suspected as much. Maria told me he provided financial support until I turned 18, delivered through lawyers with strict confidentiality agreements. She refused most of it, accepting only enough to ensure my education wouldn't suffer. His gaze drifted to the photograph between them, a tangible bridge across decades of separation. She wasn't bitter, Victoria. She always spoke of Alejandro with a kind of wistful respect. She understood his choice to remain with his pregnant wife, to build the life he had committed to. The compassion in his voice for a father he had never known struck Victoria with unexpected force, creating the first hairline fracture in the emotional wall she had maintained since entering the room. Victoria's hand moved of its own accord, fingers tracing the outline of her father in the photograph. She had thousands of images of Alejandro Reynó, formal portraits, newspaper clippings, candid family moments, but none captured this particular expression of carefree joy. It was as though she was glimpsing a version of her father that had been carefully excised from the family narrative, existing in a parallel reality she had never been permitted to witness. "DNA testing would confirm your claim," she said after a long silence, her analytical mind already mapping out the practical steps required to address this situation. Yet even as the words left her mouth, Victoria knew with bone-deep certainty that no test was necessary. Blood recognized blood, and something primal within her had identified this stranger as kin the moment she looked into eyes so unsettlingly like her own. The private elevator ascended silently to the penthouse offices, its mirrored walls reflecting Victoria and Sebastian standing side by side, a visual study in contrast that told the story of their divergent lives more eloquently than words could capture. Victoria had dismissed the security team with firm instructions that the morning's events were to remain confidential, a command backed by the implied threat that careers depended on discretion. The decision to bring Sebastian upstairs had been instinctive rather than calculated, perhaps the first truly impulsive choice she had made since taking control of Renault Enterprises after their father's passing. The 30-second journey stretched into an eternity of awareness as Victoria observed their reflections, her tailored perfection beside his dignified poverty, both wearing faces that echoed Alejandro Reynó's dominant genes in different movements and expressions. The executive floor spread before them in a showcase of understated luxury, rare hardwoods, museum-quality art, and floor-to-ceiling views of Barcelona that emphasized the Renault family's position, literally and figuratively, above the city they had helped shape. Sebastian paused at the threshold, his architectural training evident in the way his eyes catalogued design elements and structural choices with professional appreciation, despite the circumstances. He always did favor Mies van der Rohe's philosophy, Sebastian observed quietly, nodding toward the minimalist furnishings that emphasized function without sacrificing elegance. My mother said he could quote "less is more" in 5 languages. The personal insight into Alejandro, something Victoria herself hadn't known, landed like a physical blow, reinforcing that this stranger possessed pieces of their father that she had never accessed. Victoria moved to the bar tucked discreetly into a wall panel, pouring 2 glasses of water with the deliberate movements of someone buying time to process unprecedented emotional turbulence. "You've been homeless for how long?" she asked, her back still turned as she struggled to reconcile the educated, articulate man before her with the reality of his current circumstances. The question emerged more bluntly than intended, the famous Renault directness asserting itself despite her attempts at diplomacy. She handed him the crystal glass, their fingers briefly touching in the exchange, the first physical contact between siblings separated by a gulf of privilege and circumstance that seemed simultaneously bridgeable and vast beyond measure. Sebastian accepted the water without comment on its delivery in crystal, worth more than a week's stay at the shelters he frequented. 14 months, he replied with the same matter-of-fact tone he might use to discuss the weather. When the firm collapsed, I managed for a while on savings. Then came medical bills when I broke my leg on a construction site. Temporary work that paid poorly, but was all I could find. The apartment went next, then the storage unit, holding what remained of my possessions. He sipped the water with the careful appreciation of someone who understood that clean drinking water wasn't universally guaranteed. The pandemic finished what was left of my safety net. There's a certain irony in being rendered homeless while possessing the architectural knowledge to design award-winning shelters. Victoria crossed to the wall of windows, gazing down at the city where somewhere, invisible from this height, her half-brother had been sleeping rough while she commanded an empire from climate-controlled comfort. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. The same blood flowed through their veins. The same father had contributed to their existence. Yet circumstances had placed them at opposite ends of a spectrum so wide it seemed almost comical in its extremity. "I could give you anything," she said softly, the words emerging not as charity, but as a bewildered recognition of the arbitrary nature of their respective positions. An apartment, a job, investment capital to restart your firm, it would be nothing to the company's bottom line. She turned to face him directly, needing to witness his reaction. "Why didn't you approach me sooner, before things became so desperate?" Sebastian moved to join her at the window, maintaining a respectful distance while sharing the panoramic view. Pride, perhaps, or perhaps understanding that true connections can't be built on financial obligation. His reflection in the glass showed no resentment, only thoughtful consideration of the cityscape before them. "I wanted to know if there was anything between us beyond the accident of shared genetics. If you rejected me knowing who I was, that would be an answer in itself." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "I've had months to adjust to the knowledge of our relationship, Victoria. You've had less than an hour. I don't expect immediate acceptance or trust, nor do I believe money can substitute for either." Victoria studied his profile against the backdrop of Barcelona, seeing echoes of Alejandro in the set of his jaw and the contemplative furrow between his brows. For 27 years, she had been an only child, singular heir to a legacy and fortune that had shaped every aspect of her existence. The realization that this essential truth was built on deliberate omission sent ripples of uncertainty through foundations she had never thought to question. "Our father built this company from nothing," she said finally, gesturing toward the corporate headquarters that dominated the view. "He told me countless times that everything he created was for me, his only child, his legacy." The words tasted different now, layered with implications she couldn't yet fully process. Yet all this time, his firstborn son was out there, unknown to me. Sebastian's expression softened with unexpected compassion. "He made his choice, Victoria. A flawed choice, perhaps, but one I've had decades to contemplate. Maria always believed he truly loved your mother, that their relationship was a momentary departure during a difficult time." He turned from the window to face her directly. "I didn't come here to claim half of everything you've built or to disrupt the legacy you've continued, but I couldn't die someday knowing I never attempted to know my sister." The simplicity of the statement hung between them, its emotional truth cutting through layers of complication with unexpected clarity. In that moment, the vast inequality of their circumstances seemed simultaneously paramount and irrelevant, a contradiction that would define whatever relationship might develop between two people connected by blood, yet separated by every other conceivable circumstance. 3 weeks after Sebastian's unexpected appearance, Victoria found herself in a part of Barcelona she had rarely visited, despite having lived in the city her entire life. The narrow streets of the Gothic quarter held a different energy from the sleek financial district where she typically moved. Here, history pressed close, centuries of stories embedded in worn cobblestones and ancient walls that had witnessed the city's evolution through plague, war, and renewal. She had suggested meeting at one of her usual restaurants, but Sebastian had counter-proposed this cafe tucked away on a sun-dappled plaza where chairs spilled haphazardly across uneven stones and locals dominated the clientele. Victoria recognized the choice for what it was, neutral territory where neither of them would have the upper hand of familiar surroundings. A diplomatic consideration that revealed Sebastian's careful approach to their emerging relationship. DNA tests had confirmed what Victoria had known instinctively from their first meeting. Sebastian Alvarez was unquestionably her half-brother, sharing 3% of her genetic makeup, according to the comprehensive panel she had arranged through the company's medical division. The clinical report had landed with curious anticlimactic finality on her desk. Scientific validation of a truth her body had recognized instantly through some primal recognition beyond conscious thought. She had hesitated only briefly before forwarding the results to Sebastian's new email address. The first of several practical steps she had taken, while still uncertain of the emotional landscape they were navigating together. The apartment she had secured for him in a modest but respectable neighborhood remained a point of gentle contention between them. Sebastian had accepted only on the condition that it be structured as a loan against future employment. Sebastian was already seated when she arrived, nursing a simple coffee while sketching in a weathered notebook, an architect's habit that had survived despite years away from the profession. He rose when he spotted her, the instinctive courtesy revealing glimpses of the education that poverty had not erased. "You found it," he observed with a small smile, pulling out a chair for her. "I half expected a call saying your driver couldn't navigate these medieval streets." The gentle teasing represented a tentative step toward the familiar territory of sibling interaction, testing boundaries that neither of them had experience navigating. Victoria's childhood as an only child and Sebastian's solitary adulthood had left them both unpracticed in the particular dynamics of brotherhood and sisterhood, territory they were mapping together without precedent or guide. Victoria settled into the surprisingly comfortable chair, accepting the menu from a waiter who showed no recognition of the woman whose business decisions regularly made national headlines. "I walked from the cathedral," she replied, experiencing an unfamiliar sense of anonymity that felt oddly liberating after years of careful public presentation. It seemed appropriate somehow, getting lost in the oldest part of the city while contemplating centuries of family history I never knew existed. She studied him over the rim of her water glass, noting that 3 weeks of proper nutrition and shelter had already softened the hardest edges of his previous existence. The new clothes she had sent remained simple and understated. Sebastian had exchanged only what couldn't be salvaged from his former life, maintaining connection to his identity despite changing circumstances. Sebastian closed his sketchbook, tucking it aside as he focused fully on her presence. "I've been thinking about what you proposed," he said, referencing her offer to create a new architectural division within Renault Enterprises focused on sustainable urban housing. "It's generous, more than generous, but I'm concerned about the appearance of nepotism. Your board members and executives have spent decades earning their positions." His fingers traced patterns on the condensation of his water glass, architectural mind always mapping and creating even in unconscious moments. "I've been away from professional practice for years now. My knowledge of current building codes alone would require significant updating before I could contribute meaningfully." Victoria leaned forward, the businesswoman's intensity momentarily overriding the sister's uncertainty. The position would capitalize on your unique perspective. Someone who understands architecture and has experienced homelessness firsthand would bring invaluable insight to our development projects. She paused, recognizing that her approach bordered on the transactional comfort zone of corporate negotiation rather than the more complex territory of family relationships they were attempting to navigate. "But perhaps that's moving too quickly," she acknowledged, consciously softening her expression. "We have time to consider professional collaborations. Today I thought we might focus on more personal matters, filling in 34 years of history that neither of us knew we shared." The afternoon unfolded in layers of revelation as coffee gave way to lunch, then eventually to early evening wine as shadows lengthened across the ancient plaza. Victoria shared carefully curated stories of her childhood in Alejandro's shadow, the weight of expectations, the privileged education, the gradual assumption of corporate responsibilities that had defined her adulthood. Sebastian offered glimpses of a different life with Maria, financially modest but rich in affection, centered on education and appreciation for beauty rather than accumulation of wealth. As the siblings cautiously constructed bridges across the chasm of their separate experiences, Victoria found herself simultaneously envying aspects of Sebastian's upbringing while recognizing the tremendous hardships he had endured. Particularly in recent years, a complex emotional response that defied simple categorization. Sebastian extracted a small object from his pocket as twilight descended on the plaza, streetlights flickering to life around them like stars emerging in sequence. "I wanted you to have this," he said, sliding a worn silver pocket watch across the table. It was the only thing of Alejandro's that Maria kept. He left it at her apartment during their last meeting, and she never returned it. Perhaps she kept it knowing someday it might serve as a connection between his children. The timepiece rested between them, tarnished, scratched, and infinitely more valuable than the platinum designer watch adorning Victoria's wrist. "It stopped working decades ago," Sebastian continued, "but I thought perhaps it represented something important about time, how it divides us, connects us, and ultimately reveals truths that can't remain hidden forever." Victoria lifted the watch with unexpected reverence, its weight disproportionate to its size, as though heavy with the history it had witnessed. Her thumb traced the engraved initials on the back, AR, the same letters that crowned the corporate headquarters, visible on the city skyline beyond the ancient rooftops surrounding them. "I never knew him to carry a pocket watch," she said softly, the simple statement encapsulating the larger reality that they had each known different versions of the same man. "It makes me wonder what other parts of himself he compartmentalized, what other aspects of Alejandro Renault existed beyond the father and businessman I knew." She closed her fingers around the timepiece, the physical connection to their shared ancestry, temporarily bridging disparate lifetimes. "Thank you for this, and for finding me, despite everything." The words emerged with uncharacteristic vulnerability, acknowledging that Sebastian's persistence had forced open a door to truth that might otherwise have remained permanently sealed, revealing not only a brother she never knew existed, but dimensions of her father that completed a portrait previously left unfinished.